Now we're ready to start sewing our pajama pant. Here you can see the instruction packet, and we are going to be following the steps slightly differently. So please make sure to note this on your pattern and also just follow along with the video so that it makes the most sense. Also, you will notice I am narrating this video because for some reason the audio did not record when I had the microphone on. So I will be doing my best to narrate over my recorded sewing demonstration. So please bear with me on this video. Here on page 2, you can see that we're working on pants C and D, and this page gives us some sewing information that we're going to be sewing at a 5/8 inch seam allowance unless otherwise noted. Read through here in the glossary and also see the shading key for the right side versus the wrong side of the fabric so that you're always sewing with the correct sides together. Here we're on page number 3 with the sewing instructions. The pant begins on the bottom left-hand corner with step number 1, but we're actually going to be changing the order of our sewing steps. We're not going to follow this exactly. This pattern, there's different ways to sew the rise of a pant. So the rise is your crotch area, and this pattern does not, these steps don't have us doing it the way that it would be done in a factory. You don't get a very nice smooth curve on the rise with the way they have it here. So we're actually going to be doing it a different way, which is why we're changing the steps. We're actually going to be starting with step 3, which we're now going to call step 1. Step 4 becomes step 2, and then step 1 becomes step 3. And we're actually not going to be doing step 5. That's going to be incorporated into step 2, which you'll see in the sewing demonstration. We're actually going to be sewing across the top of the pocket with the sewing machine. We're not going to be doing it by hand or basting it. Basting refers to a temporary stitch that can be pulled out, so it's a lot longer stitch length. You did the basting stitch on your apron. We're also not going to be doing step number 2. Instead, we're going to do a different method for sewing the rise of the pants. So you'll just have to watch the demonstration and see the video on how to do this step. Our first step is taking the pocket, pattern piece number 7, and you should have 4 of these, and we're going to be stitching these to the front, the 2 fronts and the 2 backs. So here you can see I am pulling out the front. These circles are indicating notches, and what we need to do is clip those notches because it's going to let us know where to sew our pocket and leave an opening for our hand. So those 2 circles are going to line up with the circles on our pattern, and I'm just going to pin these in place just so you can get an idea of how the pockets line up on the pant and where we're going to be sewing. You don't have to do this exercise by putting the pocket on top of the pant. I'm just kind of showing you. So if you were doing a size medium, you would line it up on the medium dot. I'm making a size large here, so I'm lining up the notches. And what we're actually going to do is line them up, and then we're going to clip our pattern and our fabric. We don't have to worry about clipping the pocket. We're just going to be clipping the front and the back of the pant. So I'm just taking my nippers and I'm clipping like 1/4 of an inch or an 1/8 of an inch. Actually, we don't want to go that far in. So I'm just going to do like a little 1/8 of an inch clip right where those circle notches are, but right at the edge of the pattern. And then we can take I'm going to take the pins off and also take off the pattern. And I'm going to do that. So this is the front, and I'm going to do the same thing to the back side. Here I'm laying down the back of the pant, and I'm going to get my scissors, and I'm going to just do a little tiny clip right where those notches are, the circles indicating the opening for our pocket. That's where our hand is going to go in, is right in between those 2 circles. Now I'm ready to start taking out all of the pins from the front of the pant, and we want to make sure we keep the front and the back separate at this point. So don't take out all of the pins and the patterns and then accidentally mix up the front and the back of the pants. So let's keep the pattern pieces with the two fronts and the pattern pieces with the two backs. Oh, and it looks like I'm taking out the pins on the back. So here I have my back of the pant, the two legs. I'm going to move one of the legs out of the way and then just have my my one leg laying flat. That's my selvage right there of my fabric, and it is going to be in my seam allowance. My fabric was very narrow and I ran out of room, so I did kind of have to go a little bit into the selvage. Now we're ready to grab our pockets and lay our pockets with the right side facing down. So here you can see my pocket also has a little bit of the selvage on it. So I have the out seam of my my pant. I'm matching the notches and lining those up. And I'm going to place pins in perpendicular, and we're only going to sew from the top of that pocket all the way down to the bottom of the pocket. We're not worried about the pocket opening just yet. Right now we're just stitching that out seam of the pocket to the pant. Now I'm bringing in the other back leg and I'm matching up the pocket to the side seam. Remember, we want right sides together. I'm matching up the notches and gonna go ahead and pin. Now I forgot to cut the notches on my pocket, so I did go back and I made a little clip in there, but that's why you're not seeing the two triangles line up. Now I can set this aside and work on the two fronts and pinning the pockets to the two front pieces. Before I set these aside, I'm going to group them back together and take my pattern piece and lay it on top just so I can stay organized. So there's my back pattern. I'm going to kind of bundle these all together and set them aside so then I can go and do the same working on the front. Going to add the last pockets to the front. You didn't see me do one of the pockets, but I did add one pocket to one of the front legs, and now I'm finishing up the other front leg. So you'll do this 4 times, adding the pocket to the side seam or the out seam. I'm gonna grab my other front and we're going to be ready to start sewing soon. You can see we're going to be sewing from the top of the pocket all the way down, and we're actually going to be sewing at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, a 1/4 inch. Now we're still on step 3. So first we pinned and now we're stitching at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then we're going to press the seams towards the pockets. So I'm going to put my two fronts and lay my front pattern piece on top so that we can keep track of which is which. We don't want to mix up the fronts and the back just yet. I have my sewing machine set up for a straight stitch, and I'm at a 2.5 stitch length. And I'm going to go straight to the pocket. I'm going to plant my needle, and I'm at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, so I'm lining up the edge of my presser foot with the edge of my fabric so that I'm at a 1/4 inch. And we'll later be sewing at 5/8 inch, but we're doing this at a 1/4 so that it's hidden in the 5/8 inch seam. So I'm just going from the top of the pocket to the bottom, and then I'm back stitching and trimming my threads. Now we're going to do that 4 times total because we have 2 fronts and 2 backs with our pockets. Now we need to add a finish along that raw edge so that the fabric doesn't come unraveled when we wash our pants. So the first thing I'm going to show you is just a zigzag, which we have done. We're going to change some of the settings. So we're going to change the dial on the far left to B. And then we're going to change the dial in the middle. We're going to shorten our stitch to a 2 length, and then we're going to keep the position all the way on the far right the same. So we're just doing a zigzag, and I'm going to line up the edge of the fabric with the edge of the presser foot. So we're at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I'm just going to zigzag that raw edge. And I'm telling you in the video, you want to make sure that your zigzag stitch does not go over the single needle stitch. So we want it to fit in that 1/4 inch space. We don't want it visible. So if it goes over to the left of the straight stitch, then that means it's going to be visible. So just adding the zigzag along that raw edge. And now we have a nice finished edge that won't unravel when you wash these. So I've already sewn my other pocket here with the straight stitch at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And now I'm going to show you another option on how to finish the raw edge. We're going to change this middle dial to S, the red S, and this is going to activate the red stitches that are on that bottom row on your machine. So I'm going to go to G now on the far left dial to activate the faux overlock stitch. And I'm going to lower my presser foot, and then I'm going to start sewing. Now you'll notice this stitch takes much longer than the zigzag. There's more thread involved, it's going over and back, it's a little more detailed. I am at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, so the edge of my fabric is lined up with the edge of my presser foot, the same as the zigzag. We just want to make sure that that stitch stays in that 1/4 inch space between the raw edge of the fabric and the stitch line. You can decide if you want to do the zigzag or the faux overlock, and do this to all 4 of the pockets on all 4 of the legs. We will be ready to finish the last part of this step, which is pressing the seams towards the pockets. All right, now we're ready to press the pocket bag. I'm going to flip this over, and so we're looking at the wrong side of the fabric. We have the right side facing down. We're going to press that seam allowance towards the pocket, and I have my iron over here set at medium. You can also set it at high depending on your fabric, and we're just going to press that seam allowance towards the pocket. And we're going to do this on all 4 of the legs, the 2 fronts and the 2 backs. Flip all of them over so the right side of the fabric is facing down, and press the seam allowance towards the pocket. I'm also going to get out some of the wrinkles that I have here in my fabric because I've been folding it and putting it in piles, and this is linen, so it does wrinkle pretty easily. So I'm just going to get out some of these wrinkles. You might want to do the same before we start sewing our inseams and outseams together.